Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Identity Love Podcast, episode number 5. I'm Tracy Konane. I am a life coach and identity specialist for folks who have lost themselves in relationships and no longer know who they really are. I help you not only find yourself, but enjoy being yourself and no longer have to rely on your partner and your relationship to feel good. So, how are you all doing? I hope that you have been thinking about things differently in your relationship and in your life and have been thinking about this idea of the cooler version of yourself. So, if you haven't started this podcast from the beginning, I encourage you to go back and listen to it because it's going to make so much more sense. It's going to be so much more impactful when you actually understand what it means when I use the terms your coolest self or your muses and stuff like that. And speaking of defining things and making sure that we understand everything that we're talking about here, because the more that we make sense of this stuff, the easier and faster it is that we're going to be able to apply it to ourselves and our lives. I wanted to take this episode today to define something that I feel like I say a lot, but I didn't really actually take the time to properly define it. And so the phrase I'm talking about is making your life make sense. A life that makes sense to you. Does your life make sense? And I feel like I say this a lot. I'm like, does it make sense to you? Make your life make sense to you. What does this mean? And I really wanted to define this because to me, this is one of the clear tests to see if you actually have lost yourself in your relationship. When you think about this and you say, oh yes, this is me, then it's true that yes, you have lost who you are, you have lost your identity, and it's time to think about things in a new way. It's okay. We just get things back on track. So when I ask if your life makes sense or not, look at your life on like a snippet of a daily basis. Daily life, mundane life, right now in your relationship. What does it look like? What does it consist of? So thinking back to a time when I was most in my partner pleasing mode, I took a look at how I was spending my time. What emotions was I having? What was my main focus? What was going through my mind? How was I structuring my day? What were my habits? Did I have hobbies? What was I preoccupied with? What was my daily life like? So I looked at it and I was like, okay. And I was journaling this, so I encourage you to journal it out because then you can sit back and look at it and say, oh, wow. All right, so I have a record of this and I can actually visually see it, which is very powerful. So I encourage you to write this down. But I started off from when I woke up. I noticed, all right, so as soon as I wake up, the first thing I think about is my partner. I think about what is he doing today? How is he feeling? What do I need to do to adjust myself to his life? That was the first thing I thought about. And then I would rush to get ready because I was always waking up late because I was always trying to stay on schedule with him and he was usually up late doing stuff on his own or doing stuff out with friends, and I was always trying to stay and match his schedule. So I was usually waking up late and then I had to rush to get ready. So rush. I barely ate breakfast. I usually ate literally a cold Pop-Tart that just out of the wrapper in the car while driving and drinking sugar-free Red Bulls. I used to live off of sugar-free Red Bulls. And I'd wake up and the house would just be a mess because that wasn't a priority for either of us. We were just like going through life. And everything would be a mess. It would just feel like crap, basically, to get ready in the morning. I'd be rushing off to class, and then I'd be sitting through class just barely holding on, barely staying awake, falling asleep when they projected those slides on the wall. Oh my God. When they put the slides on and they dimmed the lights, it was just so sleep-inducing. So I remember just being embarrassed because I could tell the professor was looking at me, and I'm just nodding off, and I was just trying to stay awake. I'd like pinching myself, and then I'd go and rush and try to just get a really cheap, quick lunch, and then I'd try to sleep in the car in between classes, and then sometimes I'd just skip my next class because I'm too tired, or I'd even like text him and see what is he doing, what's he up to, and then if he was close by doing something, or he was off his class early or off work early or something, I might skip my class to go meet up with him. And so I remember an entire semester where I barely went to this one class, and I don't think the professor noticed because it was one of those big lecture halls, but I barely showed up at that class. And it really bothered me, and I felt so bad and anxious throughout the entire semester. But that class was just during the afternoon when I was so tired or just wanting to do something different other than trying to stay awake in class. And then if I had to work that night at my restaurant job, then I would go there and be exhausted the entire time, just chugging more Red Bull to stay awake, always worried. I'm like, ugh. I was just so annoyed. I'm like, am I managing to get by? Can anyone notice that I'm so tired? And then, instead of going to sleep afterwards, going home and going to sleep, I would just check in to see what my partner's doing at that time. And he's usually going out with friends. Usually something's going on. And so I'd stay out and drink and go home late and go to sleep just like in my clothes. And I'd wake up the next morning and the cycle would repeat. And this was my life. So now that I captured a basic snapshot, and I looked at even finances and everything, I was always paying my bills late. My savings weren't always up to par. I had no idea how much was in my bank account. I wasn't on top of my finances. I looked at every single thing. What was in the fridge? Barely anything healthy. I never bought anything that wasn't processed. I never bought produce. I looked at all these different things in my life. And so I wrote down just all the details I possibly could. And I didn't judge myself. I just wanted to take a snapshot. And then I asked myself, if I removed my partner from the scene, if my partner disappeared from my life, would any of this make sense still? Would my life, without changing anything, without changing the way I was living it, make sense to me? And I immediately just looked at this and I was like, no. Look at I'm not even paying attention to this thing that I say is important, which is getting my degree. I'm skipping this class and I'm having all this guilt and anxiety built up through the day. I'm barely staying awake through class and work. I'm not sleeping. I'm not feeding myself right. And everything is just built around checking to see what he's doing, checking in to see what might be going on with him later. When am I going to meet up with him? And this was my life. And I would not want to wake up and the house be a mess. I would like to take my time during the morning. And so none of that made sense to me. I was like, yeah, if he disappeared from the picture tomorrow, I would not be doing any of the same things. I'd be like, okay, I want to go to bed at this time because I want to wake up and have enough time to actually drink a freaking cup of tea or coffee or something a little bit more wholesome than just energy drinks nonstop in the morning and maybe put on some nice music. Like, I started to notice that I had all these preferences that would replace all this nonsense that I was doing in my life. And even just down to the clothes I was wearing and the goals I was going for and the hobbies that I was trying to pursue. I wouldn't really want any of those things necessarily if my partner wasn't in the picture, if this relationship wasn't in the picture. I would have no motivation towards those things. I would see no sense in it. And so I realized that deep down, under the surface level of the relationship, my life did not make sense to me. I was living a life that did not make sense to me. And this is why I was feeling and acting so crazy. This is why I barely felt like I held it together. This is why I was going through life just frazzled. And maybe when I put it this way, it sounds very obvious from the outside. You're like, how can you not tell your life is a mess if it's visually a mess, if you can barely function in school and in life? Because sometimes we can go through life and we're just doing it from the outside and it looks fine, right? But my life kind of seemed like a mess. But nobody from the outside could tell this is what my life was like. They might think I might be a little bit tired or something, but they didn't really know what the extent was. And this is the thing, is that we often, as people pleasers, partner pleasers, we go through life keeping everything on the surface together so nobody can tell that something's wrong. Least of all ourselves. Because we keep going through and thinking, okay, my boss can't tell, my parents can't tell, my partner can't tell for the most part. So good, I'm doing good. I'm keeping everything together, even though we are falling apart. And it sometimes takes spelling it out like this for us to realize how insane it actually is. And so even with clients, oftentimes they say, oh no, I have this job. It's going well. I'm doing this. I just bought a car. It's going well. I don't really drink. I don't do all these things. I'm eating, fairly well, all these things. But underneath, it is constant anxiety, constant preoccupation, barely doing things the way that you want to do, barely taking care of yourself. And so it depends on what is going on beneath the surface and how, like the emotions, the preoccupations. So notice that when I realized how I actually would conduct myself in life, if it was up to me and didn't have my partner, there was this piece of waking up and paying attention to myself and of wanting to have a nice start to my day. It's a different emotional state. So it's not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. Does it make sense to you? And what it feels like when you write this down and take a step back and look at it is like kind of similar to when you're watching somebody play a VR game and they have the headset on. And so only they can see what's going on. So you see them moving around and running around and getting scared and like lunging and fighting and just turning around and looking at stuff that's not there, right? And it's so funny from the outside to watch them flail around and do that because it looks crazy. It looks like nonsense. But to them, it makes sense to them in the moment because they have the headset on and they see all these things that is not in reality. They're not in reality right now. They're in this virtual reality, literally. So that's the same thing. To us, we are living in this VR headset world where we have this thing over our eyes and we see through our partner pleasing lens. And that's why we're going through our lives doing all these things that look like nonsense from the outside because we're in a virtual realm. We're not focused on reality, on what we actually want, on what's actually good for us, on what actually benefits our day. We have a VR headset on in which we see through our partner being the supreme priority of everything in our day. So we act and feel crazy because we're not actually living in our own reality. So, like I said, I had to think about the contrast between what would feel sane. What would it look like if it was just up to me? And go through the details. Write it down so you can look at it and compare and contrast. So I wrote down I wanted this nice morning. I wanted to wake up to a clean and orderly house. Even though this is something I have never prioritized in my life, I wrote it down because it sounded like it felt good to me. So don't try to fathom how different it is from your norm or how this is going to be possible. This is just about collecting information about yourself and what you truly want and what feels sane and beneficial to you and your life if your partner was not in the picture. Okay. So then I'd say, even though I've never done this before, I would want a nutritious breakfast. I would like the experience of eating something that I know is good for me so I can start my day actually feeling awake. And speaking of feeling awake, I would have woken up having prioritized a good night of sleep, whatever that's like. I have never done that before in my life. I've always tried to avoid sleep at all costs, but it would make total sense and benefit my life so much more if I prioritized getting enough sleep for myself and then having a nice morning so I'm not rushing to class and barely finding a parking spot and being upset and being barely on time, often late, and it's embarrassing, and then I barely stay awake. It's like, I want to drive there listening to something that's uplifting and music I like. I want to enjoy my commute there. I want to get there early enough to stress-free find a parking spot. I want to be alert in class and actually learn stuff and not be stressed out and embarrassed and feel like shit afterwards. And then I would like to maybe meet more people on my college campus and hang out with people more instead of just crashing out in my car, going to sleep in my car in between classes. Maybe cultivate some friendships so I can have lunchtime with these people, so I can have friends that are not within what my boyfriend's world is. I want to have friends of my own that we can all talk about and share and have this thing going on together. And then I want to make it to my classes. I would go to my class. If my partner wasn't in the picture, I wouldn't be checking in to see, do I want to go to class or not? I'd just be going there and I'd feel better. I'd feel like I'm on top of things. I won't feel like I'm barely making it through the day. And then I'd show up at work focused and ready to work and not suffering through it. And then I'd want to eat a good dinner that I enjoy and then take a nice shower and maybe light a candle and read something and journal and just have time for myself to decompress. And so I wrote all this down and it sounded like a fantasy land because immediately after writing that all down, my brain started to think, how are you ever going to do any of this? This sounds like the complete opposite of who you are. This isn't you. How would you ever keep this up? Etc., etc. So I felt myself start to freak out and think, wow, I am so opposed to living this life that actually is beneficial and sane to me. But I want you to know that if this happens, it's okay. It is normal because we are kind of in shock in realizing how different what we want is from what we actually are doing. And we are going to have that mental pushback. We are going to feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is even feasible. It's just because we've lived so long in the habit and the norm of the partner pleasing that it's going to feel weird, and that's okay. All this is, right, is making sense of what actually makes sense to us. It's about collecting information and just having it there so at least we know. Because before this, we didn't even know. We didn't even realize that our life didn't make sense to us. We just thought we were doing it right. But now that we see the difference between the two and what we really want, that in itself is very powerful and very transformative. Because the goal is to just have a clear picture to guide yourself towards, rather than this haphazard, oh my God, oh my gosh, let's just make sure everything's okay with our partner kind of life. Instead of having that as the clear goal and the clear picture, we have an alternative thing that we can turn towards and point our compass towards and take small, doable steps towards. That gives us another way of living, that shows us another path to life. And it's not just this one thing, one shot or nothing thing. That's what makes us anxious, right? Is that we think that it's all or nothing. We have to partner please or else it's all over. That's not true. We have this other alternative route where if we were to do this and live a little bit more sane to ourselves, we would already have a better life, be in a better place to then deal with everything else in the relationship. And we won't be coming from this depleted, non-sensical, crazy place because we're living completely out of sync with ourselves. So now, of course, once you understand that and you're not beating yourself up about it and you're not getting down on yourself for how far apart the two things are, because like I said, mine was so different. It would have been like night and day. That's how different mine was. Everything was completely opposite. But I just have to say, okay, I need to just start taking small steps. That's it. I don't have to transform everything overnight because that's impossible. And I tried. Don't get me wrong. I tried once to go and stock the fridge full of good produce, which at the time I was like, ugh, I'm going to actually have to work and do something to put together this meal. Remember, I'm used to like literally canned SpaghettiOs out of the can and Pop-Tarts that are not heated up. That's what I was so used to, just like not even worth the time to make myself a meal. So when I put produce in my fridge, it pretty much just went to waste because I maybe made a salad. That's all I knew how to do. Make a salad for one day. And I ate it and it was very uneventful and very unfulfilling. And it took so long to me. I remember it felt like it took so much time and effort to do this thing for myself. And I never wanted to do it again. So I kind of wasted this whole fridge full of food. And then I would always try to clean up the house super good and then never maintain it because I was so exhausted. It's impossible to just start to do everything differently or go from one extreme to another. So instead of trying to just do all that, I suggest for you to take small little steps and focus on one little thing each week or even each month or even 90 days because that's how long they say that it needs to take a habit for habit to to set into our brains. And so I was just like trying little different things. What sounded doable? Try little hobbies. I signed up for a dance class. It was kind of like this sexy dance class. And I paid for, I don't know how many, but a whole package of dance classes. I was determined. I was thinking, I'm going to go and do this thing. I'm going to go and have a hobby. And then I remember I went to one and it felt like it took so much time and effort to get there and to do this thing and to not think about my partner that I only went to that first class. I didn't even ask for a refund. I just kind of didn't go. And I thought, okay, that was kind of a failure, but at least I tried something. And then I tried these other different things and didn't really feel that great either. But then one day, I don't remember how or what, I was just footing around on YouTube and I saw this clip of a girl having like a hula hoop, and she was dancing really well while hula hooping, and she was just dancing around and hula hooping to music. And I was looking at this and thinking, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen. That looks so fun. And all it is a hula hoop and you dance to music. She is really, really good, but that sounds like something fun. And so I went to just the drugstore and bought a little kid's hula hoop, the kind that has the water in it and it's kind of sparkly. It was so cheap. And I started practicing hula hooping and playing music. And it was just like trying to play around. And then I was like, this feels good. This might not make sense to anybody else, but I like this. And I started doing it every time I came home from work. So even if my partner at the time was going out drinking afterwards or hanging out with friends after, I had this alternative thing where I said, you know what, this actually feels good. Even though I feel the pull and I want to go hang out with them, I know that if I just go home for a little bit and start doing this thing, it's going to feel fun. And I'm going to feel like I have something other than just him to worry about. And over time, I got really good and I started learning tricks. I bought myself a professional hula hoop. I didn't even know that existed a few months earlier, but then now I had one and I was learning how to do all these off the body tricks and dancing to music. And I had a full blown legit hobby that was all my own and made sense to nobody else but me. And yes, it looked cool from the outside. And yes, I could take it to raves and stuff. I had a light up LED hula hoop and it looked cool, but this thing felt different. It gave me something outside of my partnership that gave me inspiration and a purpose. And I signed up for online hoop lessons where they teach you these tricks. And there was something I could do that had nothing to do with our relationship, that would endure beyond the relationship and still make sense to me, even if something happened to us. And so it was so much more than just hula hooping. It showed me a different way of life. And so that's something I want to tell you in the beginning. No matter how small or how silly or insignificant something might seem like, sometimes it literally is just setting up your own desk. Because I've had clients who shared their working area with their partner and their side, they didn't have their own side of the desk, and they got their own desk and had it with just their stuff on it. And just that in its own was a whole up level in from where you were before to where you can see yourself in a slightly different light. And that is powerful. And that's what happened with the hula hooping and even hanging out with certain friends. I started hanging out with certain people that my partner wasn't that interested in or didn't know. And even if it didn't feel like, okay, this is going to be my new best friend or anything like that, it was something different where she would show me things that I never thought about before. We went out and did new things. I was just having new experiences that were outside what I knew of my relationship and my former life. And that in itself led to different things. And so even if it's just as simple as going out to coffee with a new friend, going to a new place, trying something different, doing your life a little bit different, I don't care if you put your toothbrush in a different holder or if you organize your space in a different way, or if you make little choices of waking up earlier. Like, I can't even think of it. You can think of it better. It doesn't even matter what it is. There's been so many different things. Sometimes people just need to put a lamp in their room next to their side of the bed. Sometimes people just needed to admit that they're not going to go and take care of their partner's pet 24/7, that the partner has to come and take care of their pet sometimes, or just putting some boundary. Like there could be anything that is significant to you that actually represents you doing something that is different from your norm and more aligned to something that makes sense to you. That itself is success and then powerful within itself. So it's not about exactly what it is that you're doing per se. It is how you're doing it. So you're not going to go out and try to find 10 new best friends. You find one person that you haven't hung out before, that you find somewhat interesting, and you go and you do this thing that's outside of your relationship and outside of what you've done before, and you get to experience a slightly different version of yourself, a new side of yourself, a slightly different world than the world that you're so immersed in your partnership. And that in itself is giving yourself a new way of doing something, a new way of how you do something. What you are doing is looking at what you actually value, what you actually want and prefer, and start to align your insides, your desires, who you really are deep down inside. You're trying to align that with more of what you're doing in your life, with the mindset you're doing it with the intention and the attention you're putting on it. Okay, so it's not just going through the motions and focusing on, did I do that? Okay, yes. Did I do that? Okay, yes. It's about getting to experience who you get to be while you're doing it. Okay? And what this is doing is giving you a glimpse of the real world that is beyond the virtual reality monitor of your relationship. You're taking a peek beyond the screen and seeing, oh, wow, there's a whole world around me outside of the VR screen. Wow. So even if you're partially in the VR, because you're going to still be there, it's not going to go away overnight, but you're going to know how to look away. So even when you feel like you're convinced by what's going on the screen, you're going to know how to look up and say, oh, wait, there's this other reality here. And so the more you do things differently, the more you do things that are akin to your own sense of self and make sense to you, you're going to see more of the actual reality, and you're not going to be going through life just flailing around and look crazy from the outside, thinking that what you see on the screen is real. This is reality until the very end. And it's not until the very end that we're like, oh my gosh, I could live my life entirely differently. But I was over here caught up in this other person's world, and now it's too late. So the fact that we get to figure out now, I don't care how old you are, it doesn't matter. You're still alive. So the fact that you're understanding now that you had a headset on and that you can see and explore this other world that's beyond there, that in itself is amazing and transformative, because you get to see more of what is real. And you realize that you have a choice to expand your world and live in reality instead. So that's what it means to make your life make sense. And it took me over 10 years to do this, but if you're serious about this and if you want help, personalized one-on-one help with this, this is what I do one-on-one with you for 12 months in Identity Love Year. And we go through all of this, and I help you to make sense of what makes sense to you, and then support you in doing it, and to help you with all the little things that might get confusing, and to help you deal with your partner and your relationship and whatever might get in the way of you figuring this out. And we make sure that you are guaranteed a change, so that you are not in the same place in a year, that you are so much more of who you want to be and being what makes sense to you in a year than where you are now. So come work with me. If that sounds amazing to you, I would love to help you. That is what I'm passionate about, and that is what I do. So until the next episode, everyone, I want you to think about what you can do in your life today that would make your life make a little more sense to you. Even if it's as small as making your bed, or washing your bed sheets, or buying yourself a new different color of bed sheets. I don't know why I'm talking about bed sheets, but I'm just telling you that it can be the smallest little things that can change and start to affect the way that you live your life, and to see that there's a different, more sensical, more sane reality beyond the VR headset of the relationship. All right, everyone. I'll talk to you next time. Have an amazing week. Bye. Bye, bye, bye. Bye.